This is mostly like the kind of thing I do. This is Joe Vandergas, who's the director of photography for these ads.
All right. Tell me about this feature you're going to do. Marshall's been telling me about it. You shot some moon stuff? Or
I shot the moon, I've shot the house at different times a day.
So what's
I
what's
need
the
you to
moon
help.
about?
Yeah, there's
It's the goal at the end of the road, but also the process of the road. Yeah, okay. But how's the moon come into this whole thing?
I bought this book in 1972 after reading a review in the New York Times Book Review, how it was the definitive book of my generation, a milestone book by a first-time author. I'd leaf through the book at the bookstore all the time. You got it? Okay, right, okay. I said, I'll wait for the paperback. I just gotta wait. I can't spend $9.95. I bought the paperback, and I couldn't get into it. I was like disappointed. As I started to read it, I just couldn't, you know. And I tried again over the years, and when we moved, when I married Claire, it would show up in boxes. I'd put it on a shelf, and I'd say, I gotta read this book. It was in this stack that I discovered The Stones of Summer again this past spring and decided it deserved another chance. I read the book over 6 weeks, okay, on planes, okay? The book is unbelievably great. And when I finished the book, I figured I gotta read every book by this guy. No one had heard of it. No one wrote about it since. In any event, here's what I want to talk to you about. I'm gonna find this guy and I'm gonna ask him what happened to him. You know, he published this great book. The guy was a genius and he just disappeared and never wrote another thing.
Well, I'd love to be a part of your quest.
All right, you'll do it.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm in on that.
I'm now gonna buy every copy of the book I could find on the web. I mean, this took me 2 months to read, and that's what happened to it. I lost the cover. I have the cover somewhere, and I'll have to dig it out. I hope the printer doesn't jam. One of the other things I'm doing is I put up some searches on the internet for people who've read the book, because maybe we'll talk to other people who became as fanatical as I am about it and wondered, you know, where this guy has been all these years, Dow Mossman. It's an unbelievable book. Dow Mossman's not listed anywhere online, so I head out to the local library to see what I can find. So here's a good place to start, which is Book Review Digest. 72, that's when the book was published. So these are compendiums of reviews from, you know, all books that get published during the year. Where MR, I don't know. I used to be better at this. I was in 3rd grade, I could go right to the page. Farley Moat, how about that? Howard Norman Moss, nothing. Okay, forget Book Review Digest. He's got to be here somewhere. I mean, he can't just have completely dropped down. This is contemporary literary criticism, and others, they all look the same, but they're different. This goes by titles. New York Times Book Review, which is probably the review I read a long time ago and remembered. There it is, Stones of Summer. There it is. All right, so we got what we came for marginally. A couple of little articles, we can find out more about Dow, you know, and the review that we'll check out that I remembered. I can't find anyone else who's read the book, so I send it to my old friend Andy, hoping he'll get into it.
The Stones of Summer. Give it a try. It's got a New York Times review. Mark's recommended 4 or 5 books that I loved that got me into reading other books by the same author. Fourth Mansions by R.A. Lafferty's one I just discovered as a little paperback when I was in 11th grade. I turned Mark onto that, and he really liked it.
I decided to go see my mom
Yeah, what? He's coming home on the 20th?
and figure out what was I doing in 1972.
He's up to 90 steps, that's great. I know, 45 up and back, I know, that's one. Yeah, I know, it's great, I mean, I saw him, yeah, I know, it's great, so yeah.
I mean, I can remember the books I read then, but nothing about who I was.
Yeah, well, I'm around, we'll get him in. I mean, that's the deal. We'll get him in and he'll never get out. Mom, it's me.
Hi. What are you doing here?
Hi,
That's
how
a
are you?
nice treat. Boy, here's one. Here's your graduation.
Okay, so that's
Here's one.
72, so there.
That's graduation,
that's
but there
me,
must be a
graduation.
bigger one. You had a beard, and not only did you have a beard, but you only wore the linings of coats.
I did not.
You wouldn't wear coats. You unzipped the linings, and you wore the linings. And if you wore a coat, it was inside out.
That wasn't me. I never did.
Mark,
Come on.
Mark,
Huh?
I'm telling you, Mark. Little rebellious.
Is Daddy coming home in 2 weeks?
2 weeks tomorrow. There have to be pictures.
Are you staying home from work, or what are you
I don't
doing?
know what I'm doing. Sure, for a month anyway.
I'm doing this film about a book I read, a review of back then, in late May of 72, and I'm wondering if I was sick in bed with pneumonia.
6 weeks.
Oh, so I was. So I was easily.
6 weeks. And you weren't supposed to go to graduation, but at the last minute they let you go.
Did I read? Could I read?
Oh,
it?
you read all the time. Yeah, you could read. You were always reading. You always had a book in your back pocket. Wherever we went, you were very sociable. People would talk, you'd pull out a book. You can't find them anywhere?
No.
It's just very annoying that you wouldn't ever let us take your pictures. That's all I can say.
I've come a long way, I guess.
Claire built this house. She'll do things like that. She's still building it. I help a little, but not enough. Claire designed a production office in the basement, though, so I could work here and be around more. But when she saw me drag out the old camera and begin to shoot this film here, I think she was horrified. Said I couldn't show her. I said, come on, I already shot this, what we looked like a long time ago. So we compromised. From now on, I can only show her hands and feet.
So we got one paperback, my destroyed paperback, a hardback. This is all real I could find. There's not that many if you go on to find them. It's one of these horrible packed things that splatters all over. All right, Joe. Still with us? Sunlight. All right, here we go. All right, there we go. Now there's a nice copy of Stones. There we go. This is probably a good copy. This is called Very Fine or something, you know. This one cost me $20. Got the guy's card, Stephen C. Bernard, first editions. Author's first book. Great, first and only book. All right, there's a picture of Dow. Can you see this? There he is at the time of the crime. Now that I got the hardback, there's all kinds of clues. The publisher, the jacket designer, dedications, and the like. I'm back on the computer late each night, kind of looking around. It's amazing what's there. Blind alleys, dead ends, dead people. It's been almost 30 years. My mom makes a bunch of phone calls and finds out the publisher is dead and gone. Meanwhile, I'm looking for readers online. Things begin to crack open a little. I hear from one person who remembers sitting next to a lady on an airplane who carries the book everywhere she goes just in case she finds somebody else who's read it. He got the name of the book, but didn't get the name of the lady. But the only person I can find and talk to who has actually read the book is John Seeley, the guy who wrote the original review of the book, and who I could see from his books was a pretty substantial writer and critic himself. Professor Seeley tells me he remembers writing the review. But when I ask him if he knows what happened to Dow, he replies hopefully, "No, do you?" Believe me, I'd love to go see John Seeley right now, but I can't. It's already autumn, my busiest time.
At this time, all I do is work. It's insane. 20 years of this. All I see are campaign people and production crews. At the end, all I see are monitors. Claire's gotten used to this. My kids understand, or just don't notice, I hope. I think reading is the only thing that keeps me sane. A different book everywhere. Anna Karenina on airplanes, Colin Dexter in the hotel room, Ford Maddox Ford before I go to sleep, Milos Forman's autobiography in the bathroom. The place becomes the book. The book, a place within the place.
Mark, you're not shooting me.
No, I'm not sure.
Campaign season ends. So what? With the office in the basement, I'm still working 7 days a week, it seems. I'm glad to be home more, but I wish I was home more. There's also other complications. My father bravely fights losing a leg to diabetes, but ends up in Boston for special surgery, and I go back and forth to visit him months on end. I'm not eager to go out and lug production gear around looking for Dow Mossman in the middle of everything else that's going on. But I think about Dow Mossman all the time, so I plug along when I have a day or two and see where things lead.
I mean, how big a deal do you think your mother was in your reading, like to get you to read?
I mean, huge. She was too impatient to wait for me to learn how to read in first grade, so she taught me to read when I was 4. You know, I think mostly just so she could talk about books with me. You know.
What were the first things?
First thing, Cat in the Hat.
Winnie the
And
Pooh.
then my father found out that I could read, and he made me read Ben Hogan's Power Golf.
Remember this one? Somebody told me that they think this is, that it all begins with this. But that's the ultimate writer-reader book, Harold and the Purple Crayon.
Never saw it.
You never read Harold and the Purple Crayon?
No,
Where the guy draws his own world? Yeah.
never.
Come on.
Never heard of it. Never saw it until this second. Or if I did, it's 40 years ago and I forgot.
This is my friend Johnny Goldstein. I've known him since grade school, when we traded Chip Hilton books together.
I like it.
That's good.
Haven't we always talked that this is possibly how life is? Right? I mean, when we were young, we used to talk about how this whole thing could just be a set, and we were the only people that didn't know it.
I can't believe a guy could write a book this good and just disappear and never do anything again. So I've become very curious about
John
why
Kennedy
that-
Toole.
He killed himself.
Well,
I mean, yeah, a lot of guys who do that and kill themselves.
Same
I mean,
idea.
you know, Raintree County, okay? Richard Lockridge, guy
Never-
kills
never
himself.
read that.
Yeah.
you got enough of these.
Well, that's all there. I mean, there's only a few, so I haven't found them.
So now nobody else can read this book because you have every copy.
Just about, yeah, probably. Nobody's read it anyway.
Andy reads part of the book and bogs down. I'm not sure if Johnny's read it yet. Then there's another old friend, Bob Ellis, who's just published his first novel.
When you're writing your stuff now, do you ever think back of these books, like when you were a kid, what stories, how good the stories were? They influenced
I
you?
think maybe the Hardy Boys did.
Tower Treasure. You know, they wrote about 50 or 75 more of these after the originals. Did you read every one, like up to 50?
I think I got to 25. Frank lifted the chest from the hole.
I know, this stuff was great. Frank and Joe.
Frank lifted the chest.
You know, all these good covers here.
Look at this.
Where's it? Here's the one. This, I think 5th grade, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Johnny Goldstein, I think, read this first, and then everybody had to read it. It was so great. This is great. Isn't it?
Yeah.
I couldn't get my kids to read this.
See how many
They might read it now.
Two people have checked it out since March 29. Who knows what year? And I remember the summer I sat down and read every single thing that Twain had written.
I mean, but you just read every day, right?
Pretty much.
Every day you just read. You take a different book out of the library, you'd be reading it. You'd always come in and you'd keep pulling ones off. There was endless amounts of them.
Do you remember this? When did you read that?
Old Man and the Sea?
Yeah.
2 years ago. I'd never read it at all. I blew it off in high school and never got it. I finally read it a couple years ago. I ordered it from Amazon or someplace and read it.
What do you think?
I sat down and read it in the afternoon. I liked it. It's good, you know. It's good. I don't know why they teach it in high school, what the big deal is.
I loved all that time in libraries. Now it seems to be spent on the computer or internet, but neither helped me learn anything about Down Mossman. I got a camera, friends who are willing to help, but without a plan, it's too much risk, too much money. But maybe because I have a camera, people will talk to me who otherwise might not. So I make a list. If I could talk to anyone about the books I loved and why they faded away, who would I choose?
The first permanent job I was ever given was at the University of Montana, which seemed a world very far away from the East where I grew up. I was born and brought up in Newark, New Jersey. But when I went to Montana, there was one thing that seemed familiar to me, and these were the books on the shelves of the library, because they were books that had been selected by a chief librarian who was a communist, and I myself had grown up in the movement. And most of the books that I came across were books I had known all my life. But one day I came across Call It Sleep by a man called Henry Roth, not knowing who he was, and as far as I know, never heard even the name of the book before. And I pulled it down and began reading it by asking myself the question of, why did a man who was dedicated to Stalinist politics read this book? But as soon as I got into it, I forgot all political questions, because I discovered that what I held in my hand was a book which had reimagined the childhood of everybody in a way that nobody ever quite had before. And it would never be possible for anybody who had read this book to be a child the way his parents had been a child, or his grandparents before him. It's a revolutionary book in a psychological sense.
He just disappears. He doesn't write anything again, you know.
Yes, I mean, one of the things that I'm proudest of as a critic is that once in my life, at least, I discovered a book which nobody had known about before and persuaded other people to read it, and it finally became even a bestseller. I don't quite believe it happened, but it must have. Because I sit here holding a copy of it in my hand.
I had come to Buffalo to see Leslie Fiedler, who's held the Samuel Clemens Chair at the university there for many years. It was Fiedler's book, Love and Death in the American Novel, that got me thinking about books for the first time, back in '72, around the same time I bought The Stones of Summer. I had written him months before, certain that if anyone had heard of The Stones of Summer, he would have. Fiedler told me to make sure I'd read Call It Sleep before I came, and also recommended Henry Roth's Scraps and Bits from the 40 years he didn't write. Fiedler wrote me that one-book writers was a subject that fascinated him.
Henry Roth's not the only person to have written a book and just stop.
No, indeed. Sometimes it seems to me that it's more typical for a writer to write one book and stop than to keep on writing until he produces a long bookshelf or a whole wing of a library.
Yeah, I mean, here's another one that we talked about. You know, I read it 3 times. That's why it's beat up. You know, Invisible Man.
Yeah, Invisible Man. Somehow, Invisible Man was not only a book I loved when I first read it, but it was a book which somehow gave me the sense that he couldn't go any place from there, that he had said everything that he had to say, and said it so elegantly and beautiful that anything else would be a come down. I figured he either wouldn't write a second book or write a very bad one.
Now, do you think it's because people just stopped writing? Because Roth kept a journal, and he ended up writing Ralph Ellison things that they've later published posthumously, or is it some fear of publication or some other judgment sitting on, you know?
Well, I think Ralph Ellison had a problem which not all writers have. One of the reasons that he couldn't write a second book easily was that the first book was so successful. Sometimes writers stop writing for the opposite reason. Their book is a failure. I don't know which is worse. I think maybe in the end it turns out as many writers have stopped writing and even killed themselves because of the success of a book as because of the failure of a book.
Can we call Catcher in the Rye a one novel, even though he was a
Yeah,
prolific writer?
I guess he's really a one-book writer. He's a He's apparently a secret writer of many books, but nobody has ever seen them, and we can't even be sure they really exist. So he's a virtual one-book writer. The most spectacular example is Margaret Mitchell, Gone with the Wind. People sometimes forget that she was a one-book writer. Edgar Allan Poe wrote one novel in his life. James T. Farrell, he wrote God knows how many books, but people only read Studs Lonigan. He's a writer who didn't begin as a one-book writer, but ended as a one-book writer.
Fiedler had plenty more to say. Maybe I'll put more in later. Oh yeah, I did ask him. He had never heard of the Stones of Summer. But at least he gave the book a look. I realized I had banked a lot on getting some leads from Fiedler. And like all secret hopes, when they vanish, you realize you had done too little to make them happen. I certainly hadn't done much so far. But Fiedler got me thinking about some other books I hadn't looked at in years, and I wound up in my little library again, where they suddenly seemed fresh, alive. Once a year or so, I'll move some stacks around, but this is pretty much it. The Russians are on top. I keep all the European stuff together. I always liked French novels. Some of these Gurit books I read a couple times in college. I can't believe it. Characters named A and B and stuff like that. Where nothing happens, like a teleplay. I randomly pick an Alberto Moravia book to read every few years, saving them up. I read Kundera's Book of Laughter and Forgetting years ago because it got a review somewhere, and then I read everything else by him in order. This is another great Czech book, The Engineer of Human Souls. The narrator jumps between his childhood and the present. I tried to copy it in a novel I once wrote, but I just didn't have any good stories to tell. So after that, I stopped writing for a long time. British writers I keep here too. No more has to be said, you know who they are. They need a few shelves. Americans, I don't know how to group. It just seems that these guys go together, and when I think of these writers, I think of them alike. Perhaps because I read them during the same years. There's enough to fill all the other shelves around the house, too. As I hit 40, I realized there was no point in finishing everything I start anymore. So fragments and a few pages of hope accumulated, wreckage towed elsewhere months later. I finally realized I needed some serious detective help. So I reached out to a friend of mine I hadn't seen in 20 years, Tom Furlong, who lived in Iowa, attended the workshop just a couple years after Dow, and was willing to do some legwork on Iowa soil. Meanwhile, if Tom was doing stuff there, I figured I had to do more. I arranged to visit John Seeley, the guy who wrote the original review of the book, at his summer house in Maine.
So, I've got to take things up to Maine. It occurs to me that Seeley may not have the same books I do here we want to talk about. So I take some literary criticism, Alfred Kazin. Let's write Morris, thing I want to take. Tenders of the Night I want to talk about. Sylvia Plath, The Bell Jar. Adventures of Augie March. Another good one to talk about. Catcher in the Rye. Cat's Cradle. Frank Conroy. I hope these all fit. I have a lot of books.
and gentlemen, welcome aboard Business Express with Delta American and Northwest Travel Partners with non-stop service to Bangor, Maine.
Claire and I have been up here before. We went to Campobello, but never to Eastport. So I'm anxious to see what it's like.
This is Writers Week on Fresh Air, featuring some of our favorite interviews with writers from our archives. Let's get back to our 1996 interview with Mario Puzo, the author of the novel The Godfather. Puzo died 1 week ago of heart failure at the age of 78. Now, how did you become a reader and a writer? You've said that your parents were nearly illiterate.
They were illiterate, yeah, and because of the public libraries and the Settlement House Library, Hudsonville Settlement House Library, and you started to read, and it was just the greatest thing in the world to read it. So,
What'd your parents think of you reading? It was something that they couldn't do. Were they proud of you for being able to do it?
No, I wrote a line someplace where my mother regarded my library card with the same horror that present-day mothers look at their sons' heroin needles. You know, I made some sort of comparison to that. It was, reading was not relevant. Reading didn't help you make a...
Nice rainbow. Took us thousands to paint that in. Do you know where John Seeley lives?
I'm John Seeley.
Oh,
You're Mark,
John.
right?
Yeah, how are you?
Hey. Welcome.
Nice
Number
to
2
meet you.
Green Street.
How are
This is
you?
it. Right. Mark's here.
Mark. Hi, Al.
Hi, welcome.
Yeah, I brought you a little thing.
Thank
Come on
you
in.
so much.
That's some homemade preserves, no big deal.
Yes.
Some of the things we're talking about, I think Delilah is in here. I brought that because I went and looked that up after I talked to you.
Yeah, Sullivan, Conroy.
Yeah, and these are some of the other books I thought we could talk about. This is
Yeah.
Gaddis.
Yeah.
Gaddis was, you told me that story about Gaddis.
Yeah, I'll go over that again. Territory Ahead, one of my favorites. Hamlin Hill, one of my friends.
These are criticism books I got.
Yeah,
just
there's
'cause I
Delilah.
thought-
There we are, right there. Yeah. Not Time Inc. Yeah, Northern Borders.
Some more.
Wow, you got a lot in that little box, didn't you?
And
Tony
I got some
Tanner.
more. I got.
F. Scott, Tender is the Night. They know. Wow, yes, Kazan.
This is Joseph McElroy I was telling you
Yeah,
about.
right. I've never read anything of his. Same thing happened to me that happened to you with recognitions. I started this book when it came out. I was taken by a review. I began reading it, and then something interrupted it, and I started again, and I started again, and it wasn't until I was finishing up my graduate dissertation and teaching at Berkeley in 1959 that I finally was able to finish the book.
And?
Well, I wrote Gaddis a letter. A lot came of it. And then he got discovered. You see down here, Tony Tanner now acknowledges what a great writer he is.
Can you believe this a guy like this just disappears, though? That he just...
Well, yeah, I think that, given that if he hadn't stayed in Iowa, if he'd pushed his fortunes, he might have done better. But I think rusticating like that, how many people? I told you, we talked about Delilah and Marcus Goodrich, how he disappeared. He did something else for a while, married an actress, disappeared into Hollywood. Of course, Melville was forgotten in this country. He suddenly became very important. It's hard to think of a time when Moby Dick wasn't a classic American novel. There's never any royalties. It's like making a movie. Plus, they win some, they lose some. Your book may not make the big bucks, but some guy next to you may. Stephen King writes a novel called Carrie. Who knew? He didn't know. But here I'd written a review in a major New York Times. This gets, hundreds and thousands
So you
of
never
readers.
gave it to anybody?
No.
But you're wrong. You gave it to me.
Well, sure, right. I reached you through the newspaper. That was my expectation. But the strongest way is the word of mouth. That's what really gets. By giving you the book personally and telling you this is the book you want to read it.
So there I was, out on the far edge of the country, and it turned out John knew as little as me. He had simply reviewed the book. But I decided to hang around Eastport anyway because even though John didn't know anything about the author, it was fun finally just to talk about the book, and other books too.
As long as you got a refrigerator, can get it cold, we can sell you a hot piece right now.
Oh, sure.
It needs to get
That'd be
cooled
great.
down.
And I discovered some of the other kinds of things John liked.
Just go right on your kitchen. Oh, that's fabulous.
What would you say to Dow if you knocked on the door? When I go knock on the door, what would you say?
Yeah, remember me? I wrote a review of your only book. I wrote the only review of your only book. No, I don't know. It's an impossible situation. I guess, if I were to meet him somewhere, on a cattle, you're Don Olson, right? Yeah, well, you did a wonderful novel. So I go, well, thank you. Then, I'm the guy who reviewed you for the New York Times. Maybe you remember.
And would you ask him, what have you been doing?
No.
Where's the rest of it? You
No,
wouldn't put no pressure.
No pressure. I mean, if he wants to talk about it, fine. I mean, he might turn on his heel and walk away, saying, I don't talk about that. Or he might say, yeah, well, that was a good year, wasn't it? And then I had to go to work or whatever. I don't know. I just don't know. It's a very hard thing to do. Talk to a guy who was very ambitious, clearly, to be a writer, and who came out with one book, which got well received, and then nothing followed through. It's a mystery. The kid's a genius. What else can you say? Multi-text worked in there and like a mosaic and so on. This is amazing stuff. This is what struck me first on. It's more like Kerouac, if anything, on the road, going back to California again, sort of recapturing your past and discovering, hey, it's all changed, it's not there anymore. Very inventive.
Can you think back of when you first opened the page? And the opening paragraph, which you also quote in the review, is an amazing opening paragraph.
Sure, right.
Right away, this guy can write.
But it was very clear there was a major talent. There's an explosion of energy when you open that book. I mean, it's just like words pouring out of a box. But again, it's evocative. And once you're into it, and it doesn't take too long because of that first paragraph, it stays with you and you stay with it.
What was the reaction to the review?
None except a letter from the author.
Years later, you said.
No.
Oh, you got right away.
No. It came almost, within a few weeks maybe. And he said at that time he was working as a trucker, and that was the end of that.
After endless time in the library, I came up with Carl Brandt. That's how I got that Brandt.
Yeah.
Who you say, who you know, or you say no.
Well, I know that they were in their day a very powerful agent. What they're doing now, I don't know. But I think
for someone like
he's
him as a
passed
first
on.
novel to have an
Oh,
agent.
fantastic! He obviously didn't get it by throwing it over the transom. Right. I mean, Stephen D.
Yeah. So and his
Stephen
thesis.
Dedalus.
And
Maybe
his
Stephen Dedalus must have.
Yeah, I brought that Right March. There's some great stuff in this Right March.
Yeah, that's
thing.
a fabulous book.
That's
that's
the
the Territory
Ahead.
Ahead. Yeah, fabulous book.
All right, Love and Death, American novel.
Yeah.
I got, what else we got?
Major book.
Here's
Classic.
Matheson.
Yeah.
So that was, you said mail or study?
Yeah, he did. A book more talked about probably than read. I mean, everybody talks about it.
I couldn't read that. I mean, I looked through it. It's, well, this
I
is a
never
write
have.
up. You haven't?
Never.
That's your field.
I tried.
Isn't this
okay?
the guy in your field? This is the guy,
I
huh?
wrote my dissertation on Moby Dick, and I've never yet read it through. I read it in pieces, like they take the little piece. Because it's a great book doesn't mean you have to like it.
Stones is readable.
Oh yes, incredibly so.
Right,
As I was reading it again, I was just so pleased. It was still working.
Exuberant, complex, funny, fat, touching, infuriating, lyric, and vicious. This book is America. I mean, do you think people can read this book? Read Stones? Average reader today?
I tell you, it wouldn't be
It's a tough
published
book.
today.
No?
Wouldn't be published today.
Let's go to lunch. Get out of here.
Eat. Oh boy.
I felt like I had known John my whole life. I don't know why. All we seemed to do was talk about the books we liked. But it was a lot like talking to someone who's taken trips to some of the far-off places you thought only you had seen. And even though I still had no idea why Dow Mossman stopped writing, as my little band of readers grew, I began to understand that what I was looking for was not just Dow, which of course only made me want to find Dow that much more.
see if there's any film-related things. A letter from his literary agent, who we've been asking for an interview with. Dear Mr. Moskowitz, I'd be happy to talk to you entirely off the record and on deep background, or whatever it is they say these days. It might be of some use to you to do this, if only because I think I detect a certain misunderstanding about the role of money in cases of the kind on which you are concentrating. I don't know what that means. I'll call him and find out. That's good. It's a good sign, because his agent is somebody we really got to talk to. Busy. That's one of the things that I didn't tell John Sealy when we were in Maine, was I had found out more about where Dow is than I let on. And one of the ways I did that is by writing to an old friend of mine, Tom Furlong, who, look at this, he still does longhand. There is a world where longhand letters still exist. He's not called me, he's not emailed me, he sends me longhand letters. But came across a couple interesting things, which is one of the people the book is dedicated to is William Cotter Murray. And that's in the dedication here. And William Cotter Murray happens to be a professor at the University of Iowa and may still be there. He's been there for 30 years. He's written a couple books himself, which I went and got. It's book Michael Joe, A Novel of Irish Life, so I figured I'd get that. He's told a few people about my quest for this guy. And they all cannot wait to find out what happened to him. My first guess was rather the obvious one. Late 60s, drugs, alcohol, disappointments, and abandonment of talent. Then I had a happier thought. If this novel was a summation of the first 25 years of Mossman's life, maybe you'll find him doing it for the next 25. That would be nice.
At some point, I outgrew the school library and found myself walking 45 minutes to a paperback store. I think it was called Paperbacks Etc. in the next town. It was small, 2 aisles, but I could hide out there and just look at the covers. Each cover with the promise of a wild story within. Tucked into a small one-shelf section, just a foot from the floor, were books with World War II settings. I read some Alistair MacLean novels. I looked for books in which heroes did things against all odds, or books that propelled you along a course of action to a climax. I didn't like to get there too easily either. I liked subplots and twists in the story. I picked out James Jones's The Thin Red Line, as much for the cover and size as anything else. A month later, having finished it, and therefore now feeling like an adult, I went back and got the book they compared it to on the back cover. The Naked and the Dead. The guy behind the counter, a tall, skinny older guy, was reluctant to sell it to me, so I took it out of the library instead. Old, falling apart hardback, black cover, no dust jacket. Then they would say Fug in the book, and that seemed interesting. I couldn't figure out what that meant. Fug, F-U-G. It couldn't be fuck. They wouldn't let someone put that much fuck in a book, would they? Fug. It made it fantasy almost. Well, that was good too, so I went back to the little store and perused what was left in the war section, and pulled out the last one, a bright blue one. Catch-22, 75 cents. That was the book. It just appealed to my subversive self. I actually wrote Heller a letter, and I waited for his next book. And waited. I'd gone from Harold and the Purple Crayon, up through Chip, Joe and Frank, and on to H.G. Wells, Twain, and then Holmes. I'd climbed onto the adult plateau of Jones and Mailer, and looked around, and couldn't find anything else, and then I came across Catch-22, way out there somewhere. Vonnegut was invisible, out of print and undiscovered, and everything else smacked of suburban grown-ups, Updike's couples, yuck. And so I would go to the library and continue to take out books and search for articles about Heller, anything. I couldn't believe people weren't just standing there shaking Catch-22 and talking about it. Why read anything else? Where was this guy? And then one day, there was a New York Times piece on him, and it said he worked at a regular job, advertising or something, and was working on something new, had been working on it for 10 years. And if that didn't knock me out, this did. He's quoted in the piece after working on this thing to become something happened for years, for a decade, as saying something like, I'm about 200 pages in, and it's about this guy, but I don't know much about him. I know he has a job, but I don't know what it is or what he does. He has this family, but I don't really know who they are or where they live. I don't even know his name. He just goes to work and comes home. That's about all. Joseph Heller died today. I heard some casual newsreader on a pop station today tell me that, quote, literary circles are shaken. Then later I thought I had imagined it, but I heard it again. I didn't listen to the details. I'm sad as I write this. Heller was the one interview above all I wanted to do for this film, for any number of reasons. But that's not why I'm sad. I don't know why, really. But I have tears in my eyes as I type. They say one book can turn a kid on to be a reader for life. I was already a reader, but Catch-22 excited me. It was the first book I read where the author's voice meant as much to me as the story or the characters. The first writer I wanted to know more about, because the voice behind the pages was a friend I thought I could never find in life.
He was crazy too, and had gone every free day to work on the officers' club that Yossarian had not helped build. Actually, there were many officers' clubs that Yossarian had not helped build, but he was proudest of the one on Pianosa. It was a sturdy and complex monument to his powers of determination. Yossarian never went there to help until it was finished. Then he went there often, so pleased was he with the large, fine, rambling, shingled building. It was truly a splendid structure, and Yossarian throbbed with a mighty sense of accomplishment each time he gazed at it and reflected that none of the work that had gone into it was his. Dear Mr. Moskowitz, thank you for your letter of August 28th about your documentary film.
Please use my home phone and feel free to call me in the late afternoon. Robert Gottlieb, who edited Catch-22, was editor-in-chief of two prominent publishing houses, someone who was instrumental in deciding what got published and read for decades. In fact, for most of my life.
Now, how did you not let this book fall through the cracks? I mean, you were young at that time, and you had, and how did this make it? It could have fallen through.
Well, it was a very strange moment in publishing and at Simon & Schuster, where we published it. I was in '61 already a senior editor, and my great friend and colleague, a woman named Nina Bourne, who is today, at the age of 84, still running all of Knopf's advertising brilliantly. She and I were completely obsessed with this book. We were, as Nina once said, we were like the demented governess who believes the baby is her own. And we simply never stopped working for it. It was after the book was out in paperback and the Vietnam War really was going, that younger people and college kids took to the book and made it the phenomenal success it's become and stayed ever since.
The Stones of Summer comes out in 1972, a turbulent time, and just falls through the cracks. And they couldn't get word of mouth for that, even though it had fantastic reviews, another generational book that would appeal, and it just, no one today knows about it. Do you remember seeing this?
I've never seen it. There are crazy reasons why these things happen. But Bob's Merrill's name, not that it wasn't a solid and respectable house, but its name on a piece of contemporary literature would not be a signal to bookstores and most reviewers or book editors that this is something they had to pay attention to. And yet, it could have happened because there are absolutely no rules in publishing, which is the most wonderful thing about it. you tell me that this had a great front page review in the Times Book Review.
Page 3 or 4. But,
Oh, it wasn't front
It
page.
wasn't front page, right.
That would make a difference. Because the front page at that time in the Times Book Review could really start a book off. For instance, at around that very time, no, just before, in the late 60s, I published at Simon & Schuster Chaim Potok's first novel, The Chosen, a completely obscure subject by an unknown writer, another book that we believed passionately in. But that book was launched with a front-page review in the Chicago Tribune Book World that basically said, run, do not walk to your nearest bookstore. And yet he can't have been that isolated with his connections in Iowa, etc. Who knows? Maybe this was the book he had it in him to write. There's no law that says you have to be able to write more than one book. Emily Bronte wrote one book. True, she died, but she might never have written another. Harper Lee has written only one book. Now, Joe knew he was going to write another book. He was going to take his... First of all, he took a lot of time loving being the author of Catch-22. I've never known a writer who took more generous, ample, deserved pleasure in a success, not in an egotistical way. He just thought it was great, and he had a good time. And then he got down to it, and he's a very slow worker. Catch-22 took 6 or 7 years.
Something Happened is a pretty amazing book as well.
I think an even greater book.
And read that book today, and it is totally contemporary about the honesty of a midlife narrator. There are not that many books written from the perspective of this
Something Happened is not a book for kids.
Yeah,
But,
I'm not sure it's a book for anybody under 30, actually.
well, maybe not. Yeah. But it's a book for everybody over 30.
Oh, yeah. I picked this up for 10 cents at a library sale. And I didn't have I had the old paperback copy fell apart, so I said, yeah, 10 cents,
It's worth it. Good
deal. What can I tell? I bought 2 of them. I gave one away.
The reason I knew it wasn't a first edition is the first printing didn't have these on it. It's a crapshoot, publishing. I seem to remember the last thing we did was put this little plane on in my obsessiveness, as if that was going to make the difference to selling this book. But something made the difference. Something happened.
Meanwhile, nothing happened. It's now been nearly a year, and all I can think to do is shoot pretty pictures with some of my leftover film. Other than trying the 2-year-old address for a person that isn't even the right name, I don't have much hope of finding out more. Then I get obsessed. I start sorting through every publication I can find listed on the net that has a Bobbs Merrill publisher. Hours later, I find a novel published around the same time, 1973, as The Stones of Summer. The author is Robert C. Downes. I locate several using People Finder, and one cross-checks as the writer. And even better, he attended the Iowa Writers' Workshop around the same time as the elusive Dow Mossman. Bingo. This is our man.
A one-shot novelist is not a rare situation, or as rare as a lot of people think. And I just mentioned 2 people. One is Harper Lee, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird and had such tremendous success and never wrote another thing. And I think you could also argue the same is true of J.D. Salinger.
Bob teaches writing at Penn State in central Pennsylvania, a 4-hour drive from my house. It didn't matter. This was now the real beginning of the search. So certain was I that he knew Dow Mossman that I didn't even pose the question until we were well into filming.
Well, when you first called, I was taken back to the dear dead days of my Iowa Writers' Workshop experience and having been published by Bobbs Merrill. And it was very refreshing to hear that somebody else, in fact, had been published at... you mentioned Dow Mossman, whom I'd never heard of.
I tried not to kill myself.
Since you had sent me his book about 24 hours ago, and I've had a chance to look into it, I thought he's an absolutely marvelous writer, and he's somebody who has an utterly remarkable talent. And I know we're talking here about the fact that somebody has not ever published again after having one major novel. And I find that both sad and mystifying.
You mentioned to me that even though you've published 4 or 5, how many? 4 or 5,
Well,
right?
6 novels coming out January 2000.
That you still had 5 in a drawer.
I'll have more than 5 in a drawer.
So he could have maybe have written 2 or 3 more and just never been accepted or whatever, you know. Or he could.
It's possible, but from what I've been able to read in the book in the last day and a half, I doubt it, because of the incredible verbal energy and the integrity of the prose and his character insights. And anybody who puts together 552 published pages has a lot to say.
What was your experience with Bob's Merrill? Because I've been trying to track down the publisher. They were bought out years ago.
It was the kiss of death to have been published by Bob's Merrill, because one day ITT sent an executive down and said to Bob's Merrill editors, no more fiction, and you don't publish any more fiction because it doesn't make any money. And this caught a friend of mine, Maura Stanton. She had published a novel with Bob's Merrill called Molly Companion, and had another novel in press. And that book was summarily taken out and shot dead, simply because of money. They let her keep the advance and killed the book, and so far as I know, it did not ever, was never published afterwards, although it could have been, I don't know.
Well, that, you know, he may have run into the same thing, who knows? Can you see students that you think have that at this point? Can you spot that at 122 or 23?
You can spot the talent. You can spot that marvelous verbal ability that just naturally comes to some writers. But the thing you cannot spot and you cannot teach is the drive to write a book like that. It's utterly extraordinary. It really demonstrates somebody who is on the genius side of fiction writing at a very early age.
Could he have lost interest?
That's possible. He could have lost interest. Anything is possible when someone ceases artistic production. I think you're going to have to find him. I think you're going to have to nail him down and ask him why.
I learned something valuable about writers from Bob. Plus, I had a list of names. In 3 days, I went through them. Nothing. From Morris Stanton on down. I had begun to think he had to be dead or something, or the whole book was some sort of hoax. A book written by the whole class under a pseudonym, laughing as I bounced around the country. I came to the last name on the list. Bruce Dobler. University of Pittsburgh. 5-hour drive. Why not? You know, Bob Downs has a new book coming out.
Oh, great. I like Bob. He hired me to teach with him down there at the University of Arizona. I love it. He'll tell you he has 3 books out, and then he'll tell you how he wrote them. That he was working a job, he had 4 days a week, he could be home for an hour and 15 minutes. After he ate lunch, he'd have an hour and 15 minutes to work. 4 days a week, he said, every year and a half, that should be a book. And darned if he didn't do a book every year and a half, just writing like that. And then he writes another book, and the agent says, why are you giving me this shit? So he throws it aside, starts another one.
So you were at Iowa around the same time as Dow.
Right. Dow?
Dow Mossman, the guy who, he was there in the late 60s. And
That's when I was there, yeah, 65 through 68.
Never heard of
Dow Mossman.
Never heard of
Did he write something?
He wrote this book. If you see the book, this is the book.
Stones of Summer. I'm embarrassed to say I haven't heard of it. C.D.B. Bryan, Paul Enkel, William Carter Murray. He's in Iowa, all right.
That's what he looked
There's
like.
his picture.
You remember?
No, I graduated just a year before him, so he was there at the same time. Great looking guy, but God, he's won the Book of the Month Club fellowships. A little embarrassing not to have heard of the guy, huh? I should have. And especially, you know, with
being a classmate. So
yeah, and William Carter Murray, we might have been in the same class. Oh, Mossman. I don't think I ever even heard the name.
Who was there when you were there? Who was in this class? Who might know him?
John Irving, Gail Godwin, Jonathan Penner, Andre Debus, maybe. Certainly Jane Casey, Jane Barnes Casey. Tom McHale, except he's not around anymore. Actually, I'm trying to think who else.
Well, this is dedicated.
Lots of these people.
This is dedicated to Murray.
To William Carter Murray.
To William Carter Murray.
I'll be darned.
And you had.
He was my first teacher for the whole first year that I was there. I had Bill Murray, and I thought this guy was going to get me. He tore me up so bad. The first 2 stories I gave him, I had quit their job on the railroad, lifetime job, and taken my 2 kids and my wife off to grad school. And I give this first thing into Bill Murray, expecting to be praised like I was back in Chicago in school. And he calls me in and he says, "I just got 3 questions for you. I don't want to talk about this." He said, "Is this, you take some, do you expect to get a degree?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You serious about writing?" And I said, "Yeah." "Did you take some sort of correspondence course on how to write?" I said, "No." And he said, "Why don't you just give me something else? We don't even talk about this." So a couple, 3-4 weeks later, I came back with another story I was really proud of. We even gave it a little extra. I give it to him, and he said, "This is worse than the other one. I can see the stitching all over it." He said, you write like you got no balls at all. What's the matter with you?" I said, well, he said, "Look," he said, "you're trying to polish. You need some solid stone to polish. You're not a Flannery O'Connor. You're not James Joyce. Forget it." He says, "You need to not go and write, for all this fancy endings. I would like you for once to put some words on paper that actually matter to you. That actually matter. Don't worry if it even ends. Don't worry if it's a story. Just for the first time in your life, put words on paper that matter." So I went home, I cried for a few days normally, and I went back and I wrote about 50 pages about being in Selma on the Civil Rights March. And I wrote it pretty much the way I would tell it to my friends. I gave it to him, calls me into his office, the semester's over, he didn't want to take it. It was like the day after. But he did, and he calls me in and he looks and he says, "Almost professional. Good job, keep it up." And he hands it back to me. And I said, "What else do you have to say?" He said, "What else is there to say? I'm a cog in a machine. I can't tell you anything else. I'm just doing my job here, I'm telling you this is almost professional. Cut some pages, maybe send it to Esquire." So I gave it another semester with him, and I wrote a bunch more pages. I had about 85 pages by now, and I said, "Now what do you think?" And Bill looks at it and says, "Keep it up. Going in the right direction." And this was all he had to say. But I hated him at the time, I have to say. It amuses me that this guy would credit him. I am now to the point where I would credit Bill Murray, because I'm telling my students last week, I don't need this story. Why don't you just, for once in your life, put some words on paper that actually matter to you? And Bill raised that other question, does anything matter to me? Which is a reasonable question to ask a writer. No tears in the writer, no tears in the reader, that kind of thing.
You went on to study with Vonnegut, and
Yeah.
then was he out of print at the time? Vonnegut wasn't Vonnegut then, right?
No, it was just about the year I started studying with him. People asked me, "Why are you wasting your time with him? We have this Chilean novelist, Jose Donoso, here. We have, C.D.B. Bryan. We have Coover. Why are you studying with Vonnegut? He's a satirist." And it was about that year that it all happened for him. And all of his books came back out and reissued.
I mean, in Palm Sunday, isn't there stuff about the
Yeah, in fact-
of people picking at each other and yelling? Did he have that in there? Did he write about that?
It was about as mean a place as I've ever been. I spent 5 months in the Maryland Penitentiary to write a book about it. It was a little meaner there. But the stuff that went down in the Iowa workshop was incredible. And he talks about in here some of the people who were there, but I don't think he mentions this guy. What's his name?
Dow Mossman.
Dow Mossman.
Yeah.
I don't see his name here. Yeah, it was a funny thing. Even some of these big names you see here were torn up. We sat in one workshop
How
session.
about your stuff? I mean, you published early, right out of school, and then.
I thought I was going all the way here. I had 3 books out in 4 years. I had a book out in 73, 74, 76. I started to look at house plans, doing that whole thing. And I kind of lost my house, actually, to that 3rd book. I got a terrible review in the New York Times. It's about the 2nd worst review I've ever seen in the New York Times. And it's somebody told me that if you want to be a writer, if you want to be anything, you need to visualize it. You need to really see it. I took that quite seriously when I was in Iowa and I was working on my stuff. So I had this manuscript that I was working on, and I took a paperback book and pulled it around and did The Man Who Went Off by Bruce Dobler, and I put the blurbs I'd want. If one man can be said to be the voice of his generation, it is this one crying and laughing in the wilderness, Kurt Vonnegut.
The Man Who Went Off, right?
And then on the back,
you got blurbs on the
I put the blurbs on the back.
Oh, there you go. William Murray rates a solid B in my book.
That's what I got from him both semesters.
Top drawer, C.D.B. Bryan.
Right.
Incredible first novel, Richard Yates. Yeah, that's hysterical.
The nice thing is that when my book got reviewed in the New York Times, 2 of these were the people who reviewed it. I mean, New York Times, it was C.D.B. Bryan. L.A. Times, it was Algren.
Right, and Stones, it's the same. Look.
Yeah.
He's got C.D.B. Bryan too.
Hey, the Iowa Mafia, we look out for each other. What can I tell you?
everything I get from Bruce goes nowhere, too. A slew of web searches comes through again and produces the phone number for John Kashiabara, the book jackets designer, in Florida. He tells me he doesn't remember it, but I decide to fly all the way down anyway, certain that if I show it to him, he'll remember everything. The writer, the editor, the publisher, all the stories I need.
Well, I had the violin from many years. Last time I played it was in high school. It gathered dust, and the years went by. After, 45, 47 years, coming back to it.
Okay.
Ready to go?
Don't forget the breakfast.
I'm supposed to go get my thing and bring it up here.
Fine arts, with a lot of people, it's on the back of their minds, is something that they want to do, but because of making a living, don't have the time to do. When I did The Godfather, it's all in retrospect that I think about it, because at the time it was just another book jacket, the puppet hand, and it was actually calligraphy. It was created lettering. They used that in the film too.
So you don't remember the Stones of Summer at all, doing that book jacket?
No, I don't remember.
So if I show it to you, do you think you'll remember it?
I don't know.
Who knows? There it is. And there's a jacket designed by you in the back, Flyleaf. Just one that went by, another one of thousands.
Yeah, I just don't remember it. It looks familiar, when you showed it to me, it looks familiar, but I had done hundreds of books, so.
Your name's in the back. There's a guy named Richard Wright who took the photograph. You don't know him or anything? You never met the author?
No.
Don't remember the editor?
No, I don't remember the editor, no. This was done, in fact, it was a freelance. If it's for Bob's Merrill, it was freelance. But it's not like advertising, at least when I was doing it. It was quite a different thing, I think, you went to bookstores to buy books and not the airport.
And that would be the end. In fact, it's long enough to be. But one more thing happened. A few weeks later, I checked to see if there were any more Stones of Summer for sale on the internet. And there were, 2. I didn't get them. I had enough. Besides, over the past year, no one bought them but me. Well, a few days later, I changed my mind, and they were gone. Both sellers reported that they sold instantly. Both to people who worked for publishing companies. I panicked. Something had happened, but it wasn't good. I called Joe. Luckily, he was free. My mother put together travel arrangements. I scrounged film. Less than 48 hours later, we were in Iowa. We were going to find Dal Mossman. I figure the best place to start is at the University of Iowa, and there'd be no better person to talk to than Frank Conroy. Conroy wrote one of my favorite books, Stop Time, and then didn't write anything else for years. He runs the writer's workshop.
You ever hear the book?
Never heard of it. In fact, neither Engel nor CD, who I know, nor Bill ever mentioned it to me.
Yeah. Well, can you think of other examples of people putting out this big a book at such a young age and then stopping?
Some very good books are recognized by literary people as being first rate, that don't go anywhere. Now, who knows? You know, a lot of things can happen. People have nervous breakdowns after doing a long work. That's quite common.
Right. In fact, you were one of the examples that didn't write something for a long time, but you made your way back, you know?
Yeah, I did. It was a long trip, but just speaking personally, my first book, I finished it when I was 29. I started working on it when I was 25. It got unbelievable reviews, just to die for these reviews. It sold 7,000 copies.
And then how long to your second book?
A long time, 15 years. I had to make a living. I had kids. I had to get 7,000 copies for 4.5 years' work. I made, you know, how many dollars did I make? I don't know. But I had kids. By this time I was married. So I went to work as a piano player, a fisherman, did a lot of things like that to make a living. Now,
did you keep writing, or were you discouraged?
I couldn't. You know, the idea of playing the piano to support my writing was a terrific idea, except I was a jazz pianist and I had a quartet, and I played three sets a night, finishing at 2:00, dripping wet. I mean, you know, hey, I just couldn't do it. I didn't have the energy to do all of it. So I did some writing, yes. I did journalism. I did this, that, and the other thing. But it was all sort of, every writer has to do this. In fact, Updike recently said, maybe it shouldn't be a living at all. Maybe it should just be a hobby. And he did not mean to demean writing when he said just a hobby. But what he's saying is, of course, that in this culture, it's so extraordinarily difficult to do serious work and to get paid for it enough to keep body and soul together. The sacrifices are enormous. When Faulkner wrote Soldier's Pay, his first novel, his job was in the basement of a house, he shoveled coal into the furnace, 12 hours a day.
Hi. Hi. I'd like to see the special collections on Dow Mossman.
See?
We're making a film about him, and a documentary film. Hi. I'm Mark Moskowitz. We're making a documentary film about Dow Mossman, his book, The Stones of Summer. And I'd like to see the special collection of his manuscript, if you have it here.
We'd have to try to track it down. I don't know where it is exactly.
Tom, what do you think? Circulation? Hi. Hi. We're making a documentary film on a writer named Dow Mossman. And I wondered if we could dig up his thesis. M-O-S-S-M-A-N. You ever hear of him? No. M-O-S-S-M-A-N. Anybody here hear of Dow Mossman? No? No one? No. I used to work at a circulation desk when I went to college, University of Pennsylvania. I have a work-study job. Sunday nights, no one ever came in.
Okay.
I think they've closed the stacks there since.
Oh, really?
I'm not sure, but I get that feeling.
Keep people out.
Good. Here he comes.
I just need an idea or something to have.
Summer novel. 1969. This is 3 years before it got published. This is early stuff.
The dog, Arthur. This is the opening. Bill Murray.
Huh? You know, type looks good, doesn't it? Let's go upstairs.
I probably went up to Cedar Rapids and picked the boxes up and from his mother, and then we came back down and we arranged them. And the unusual thing about that, as you can see, is that the cart there said that, I mean, there's an awful lot of stuff there, and you usually don't get that much material from a writer.
I mean, how much do you get a box, you know?
You might get a small box. I mean, people don't save the various drafts very often.
Here, show it. Do you know what's in there? Do you know that at all? You've been through this?
I was through it, but it's been years.
Okay, do you mind if we just look through it and photograph some of it?
No, I think as long as you get it back in the
I'll be careful.
in the area, I can
We
get
want you
some.
not to disturb the order. But
Yeah, we won't do
other
that.
than that,
So we've been going through some of Dow's manuscript here, which is enormous. I mean, version after version after version, really. There's just 1, 2, 3, as you can see in here, there's just enormous amounts of things. This alone was a Part 3 rewrite, just for Part 3 alone. Tom's got the, this is the actual publisher typeset of what their final edits, all the blue marks are the publisher marks. You can see right to the end, they were copy editing the beginning, they were still asking questions. It's a very marked up typescript for something that has been through this many versions. What's that? Tom found this letter to Mrs. Kelly, who's the editor, and with cuts and rewrites and changes and explanations of parts she wants to cut and justifications of things, and it's fairly intense and involved. But at the tail end, right before his signature, he says, also thinking it over, don't worry about any money until we see if I can get together with you over what version this is to happen within. On the other hand, could you let me know exactly what's to happen by January 1, because I'm afraid unless something can be gotten together by then, I really want to withdraw the whole damn thing. It's just gone on too long in the air for me, and I'd want to bow out by then, even if it means sticking the thing in my closet. And it goes on, and you can't let go. After that, he's got pages. He keeps going, right? So. And this one here, you see, this is a eulogy delivered from Rome with a witch's stone of Hansel Williams, or Portrait of a Madman, Dal Mossman. A lot of alternate titles. Very densely written. One part in here is kind of interesting. It says, someday I will write a book. Everything in it, the photograph notes, the jacket blurps. On the inside covers I will write zany. It breaks upon the reader with hell's-a-poppin' speed and never lets loose, a fast-paced winner. I don't know whether that was meant to be included as one of the books within a books within the book or not, but this is neat. Can you see this? This address is young writing. Please return. Reward. I think about claiming the reward, if I ever find Dow. There was more than manuscripts in those boxes. There were photos, one of which was of a young William Cotter Murray. At the time, Bruce Dobler and Dal Mossman had his class. The librarian tells us he's still around, not teaching anymore, but living just a few miles away. So, without telling him why, we just kind of invite ourselves over. Anybody you knew right away, this guy's got talent. Boy, this guy's got talent.
No, you can't. It's not easy. Especially, you see, the workshop is essentially a short story outfit. And I'm interested in the novel. And it is very, very difficult to get a rapport with somebody who is writing a novel for 2 or 3 years without getting really, really close to him. Bugeri was the best at this that I ever. He guided me through my first novel, but he just was. He had a super way. It was almost non-directive. It's non-directive with a novel, but with a short story you can direct it a little bit. because it's shorter.
Is there anybody you felt you guided through a novel that way?
Yes, there's a guy. Yeah, I guided him. I guided him to a psychiatric ward for a while, and he got out of it and he wrote it, and he lives about 30 in Cedar Rapids, which is about 30 miles from here. And the novel was published by William Morrow. It's called The Stones of Summer, and after it was published, it was a fine novel. But we never met again after. I think it was so traumatic for him to go through the experience of writing a novel. It was a big novel too. And I tried to help, but you know, there are times you can't help. You need the guys in the white coat and the jacket, and he needs sedation to be put away for a while. Because the novel, you live it. It's you know, it's an obsessive thing. Short story is, you know, not. It's not like making love overnight, to put it politely. One night.
You think
it isn't that I despise. I've written short stories.
You think I don't know who you're talking about, so, but I do. Come here. I want to show you something.
What?
Come with me.
My cat would like to get in. Oh, I know Tom very well.
Right.
That's where you got the information about my betting habits.
Oh, about the dog track.
About the dog track.
Yeah, well, I got
because Tom is from Dubuque, you know.
Yeah, I know. Well, I said you were at the dog track all the time there.
No, it was at that time. But it's, I had an operation.
You know, I got the dog track stuff there, but I also got it because I read this book.
The Stones of Stuff from Dawn. Isn't that amazing? That is really sweet. It's one of the fine books. Now, the one thing that bothered me, I wouldn't want to have him hear me say that I drove him to a psychiatric ward.
Well, we're going to hopefully go talk to him. I haven't talked to him. I don't know where he is. Do you know where he is?
Cedar Rapids. Yeah.
And you haven't seen him since?
I haven't seen him since because you know, there's a problem with a novel. When you're guiding somebody through it, you guide them through it. And you have to play so many roles that when they finish, it's like going to a psychiatrist for 2 years or something. You either hate him or love him. It's either one or the other. But I think Dow loved me because I gave him a lot, because he was good.
He dedicated the book to you.
Oh, really? He did. I didn't know that. I have a copy of it somewhere. It's not much.
It's an amazing novel. This is an amazing novel.
It is an amazing novel.
Why did it just disappear?
It
Why
disappeared. William Morrow, they didn't do it.
Bob's, they didn't do it.
Bob's Morrow?
Yeah, they didn't do anything.
Didn't do a thing with it.
It's a very difficult book.
It is.
But it pays off, you know, the language. And if I read it, I said...
It reminded me a little bit of Under the Volcano, you know, the Mexican parts of it. That madness and surrealism. It's a major book, really, and it went nowhere. The worst thing about a novel is finishing. You see, it's like the stretch run in a horse race. You know, you battle down to the stretch. You don't want to run anymore. You're tired of the damn thing. You hate it. And yet you have to drive yourself, and this was the thing. He would lose the confidence in himself. I thought the book was going to destroy him. It almost did. I've written 3 or 4 novels, and I know you live in another world altogether. The white dreaming rock drifted off. Sitting over the quarry, Travis Thomas shuffled the dirt through his hand, smoked a long, casual cigarette, and watched the pleasant motion of his own ashes sail the water. He thought only, when I was 14 and saw those 3 assholes coming up the hill that day on their bicycles, I knew it was trouble. He shifted himself into the light and watched Dawes Williams move around in the stones. You'll find, Mark, that when I start reading, I'd lapse into the brogue.
Well, that's how that's written almost.
It is. It has a peculiar rhythm to it, so that you can't read it straight. Like I'm reading Carver now, and it is just, I don't know whether you know Carver's work, Ray Carver,
Sure.
you know, so flat. And so it's almost like reading Beckett in a way, you know.
How much of Dow is in Dawes, do you think?
All of him. He was, I mean, this was total. This was part of the problem he had with the book, that he identified too much with the book. And so much of himself went into it that he had no reserves finally to draw back and become, I hate the word at times, professional. You know, this is not professional in the sense of the pro just lays the stuff out and here it is, you like it or you don't like it.
Does anybody know him if you ask him in the bookstore?
No. Jim Harris, who owns the bookstore, probably would not know him, and Jim knows everybody.
Now, let's go back inside. You're surprised, huh?
I am surprised. What a pleasant surprise to be able to talk about that book. What a pleasant surprise.
Meanwhile, our next stop is the guy who took the jacket photo for the novel and who we learn lives just outside Iowa City.
It's a good photo. I mean, I've been looking at this photo for a lot of years.
Is that right?
It was such a mystery. What happened?
He put on his best leather jacket, I know, for that. You know. Old Triumph he had back then, that's right, yeah.
So you were there when he was writing this, or the drafts of this?
Right. I was a starving artist as well, and Moss really supported me, you know. I mean, he really did. I was living on nothing, you know. I mean, he paid me to do the jacket photo and bought paper for me and film and then help, food. I was kind of preparing to make, eventually what having to be moving back to Canada, live in exile. So,
because of the war?
Because of the war. And there's another guy living with us, Danny the deserter. He was a deserter from Nam, and he was a young kid we were putting up, or Moss was probably supporting him as well, I think. You know, I remember Dan and I picked up the mail. One of his last bits of correspondence he got there was, who was the publisher?
Bob's Merrill.
Bob's Merrill, and stamped over it was big IT&T, you know, just like stamped right over it, you know. So I said that was the kind of frustrations he was dealing with, you know, but he just relentlessly knocked it out every day, and I don't know what his writing schedule was really, you know, those were pretty foggy times.
When the book came out, were you surprised that, I mean, he got great reviews, and then?
That was what I was just so happy. I was just so happy for Dow at the time because he just got raving reviews. And he was a glimmer of hope here. You know, New York Times book review, like you say. You remember? I mean, that's almost a memory. I know that's true, and I may have the copy somewhere. But it's like, God, this guy is gonna. You know, he really is gonna make it.
This is a picture of John Seeley, who wrote the New York Times book review. I don't know if you're interested in seeing him.
Great. It's like Hemingway or something.
Yeah, very writerly there. Huh? And
this is recent.
Yeah, that was this summer. I went to talk to him, and this is a copy of the review that you remembered as well as I didn't. I might want to read the first paragraph of that aloud.
Stones of Summer by John Yeoman's notes. I forgot that part of it. Review by John Seal. The Stones of Summer cannot possibly be called a promising first novel for the simple reason that it is such a marvelous achievement that it puts forth much more than mere promise. Fulfillment is perhaps the best word, fulfillment at the first stroke, which is so often the sign of superior talent, and which is also a frightening thing, for the author may remain forever awed by the force and witness of his first production. I don't think, however, that this will happen in the present instance. Dow Mossman's novel is a whole river of words fed by a torrential imagination, and such a source is not likely to stop flowing. Yeah.
And Dow didn't want to do any promotion after it was done.
No, none at all.
He got these huge reviews, and
Dow was naive about writing a novel. He just had no sense at all of the economics of a novel, of about editorial work. I believe they made changes. These two women were his editors. You know, it was something. It was the last thought in Dowd's head that when he finished. When he finished his novel, that he would have to find an agent. For him, it was a total immersion in the experience itself.
I mean, there's a lot of names that went through your classes,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
That you picked this one out.
Yeah, pick this one out. Yeah, that's what floored me. That of all of them, not 10 people in the world knew about this book.
You know?
They don't.
Three of them here. That's about
Yeah,
it.
that's about it.
What do you think we should say to him when we see him? What do you think we should do?
Go back to my house, call him from there, and I'll talk to him, and I'll say, Dow, this is just simply something that's been earth-shaking. But I think he might want to just simply not go dragging up material in this novel again.
I have no idea what to say to the guy. He'll say, come up and talk to me, but don't bring Murray.
Don't bring Murray.
The guy's 56 years old. He's got to be able to just have some perspective on this, you don't think?
Mom, so what do you think I say to him?
I think his professor must love it. I think you should just call up and say, hi, this is Mark Moskowitz. Hi, my name is Mark. And I'm with, is he still friendly with his professor?
No,
Oh, he's not?
no,
Did you ever see him?
no.
Oh,
Why don't you call?
Mark.
You don't want to call for me?
I'll call, but none of it'll be on tape then.
Yeah, okay, that's a problem. Okay, let me call. I'm going to call him now. I'll see you.
What are you going to say?
I say hi to Dad. I don't know. I'll figure it out when I call. Goodbye.
Don't be abrupt.
Okay, I won't.
Don't.
No, no, I'll be nice.
Right.
Okay, goodbye. Bye.
Dial another number now.
This is it. I got two numbers. Try this one first. Hi, this is Mark Moskowitz. I'm looking for Dow Mossman. I'm calling from Point of View Productions. It's a film company. Okay, I have a number here. Maybe that's it. 364. Okay, I'll call that. Thanks. Okay, bye.
Dial another number now.
Okay. I don't know who that was.
Male.
Okay, this is it. Male. Might have been son or some other guy. Second husband.
Maybe Dow has gone other directions.
Well, the pressure's getting to you worse than me.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, this is Mark Moskowitz. I'm looking for Dow Mossman.
Who's this?
Mark Moskowitz from.
Moskowitz. Yeah, I'm down Moskowitz.
Oh, hi. How are you? Do you have a couple seconds to talk to me? I'm calling from a company called Point of View Productions in Philadelphia.
Yeah. Boy, there's an awful lot of junk phone calls around.
Well, this is not. This is about your book, The Stones of Summer.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's almost impossible. That's 30 years ago.
I just think it's an extraordinary book, and there were no other books from you for such an amazing
Writer's
book.
block for 25 years. My writer's block has made me kind of an introverted, sort of really flipped out writer. It is an amazingly sort of a failed story, and it's sort of a. I felt real successful when I wrote the book, personally, and it was kind of stillborn for 5 minutes, and I didn't teach after that. Oh, it's been out of print for 30 years. I mean,
Right.
in a sense, the book never happened.
So let me ask you, what are you doing tomorrow for lunch?
Oh, you can come over and see me anytime you want. That'd be the best place to talk. I turned diabetic last year, so I don't need lunch.
I'm sorry, my dad's diabetic. Sorry to hear that. Well, let's. I mean, we'll come. Are you going to work tomorrow? Or what's the?
I might be too talky, and I don't get a lot of company. I took care of my mom for 4 years, led kind of a monastic life. I'll tell you what I did. I got on my motor. I bought this Vulcan 88.
Hey, Dow.
Hey.
Hey.
How are you?
How you doing?
And I recognize your brogue, and I almost called you when I heard you read your Greyhound story on the radio. And
Oh, you heard it?
absolutely.
God, that's great.
And I'm sorry I didn't call you, but I'm kind of an introvert and reticent.
Yeah, you know, I've been going up to the track in Dubuque trying to keep in touch with the old beasties, but it ain't like the natural stuff. It isn't like the coursing.
You show up and I'll get out my granddad's Greyhound pictures.
Oh, that'd be great.
It's about one of the few things left in this house is that in my books.
Yeah.
So I almost called you so you give me a library pass. I want to go back to Iowa City and go to the library every day, maybe.
I'll get you one.
It's a long story, but I'm semi-retired. My dad left me some property, and my kids are mad at me. And you know, I named my first kid Finn. My second kid Asa. But my boys are about 19 and 17 now. And they're both.
Oh shit! You're an old man.
Oh, yeah,
You're worse than I am. Here, I'll turn you back to Mark because we're getting short of time.
All right.
I'll see you tomorrow morning.
Geez, how old is he getting to be now?
I don't know, Bill. How old are you? 70.
70.
70. You're catching up to him.
I'm 56.
You're catching up to him, Dow.
I know, I'm
Yeah,
56.
yeah, you'll catch him soon.
God, he sounds great, though.
No, yeah,
I'd
he's-
love to hear that brogue again. Tell me Mark Twain's autobiography, chapter 14, is the greatest run-on memory I ever read.
I'll
Thank
tell
you.
him. All right, we'll see you tomorrow morning.
Look forward to meeting you, for
Yeah,
sure.
thank you.
Okay,
I'll
I
see
hope
you.
I don't disappoint you.
No, I'll talk to you. Bye.
Great.
I'm so wound up that I can't sit still. I call Claire and tell her I found Dow. She's actually excited. She also tells me I got a return email from one of the publishers who bought the last used copy. He writes that he loved the book when he was 17, but he found it not as strong as he remembered, dropped it after 100 pages. What was happening at this point in my life that I loved something another guy liked when he was 17 but can't read now? My friends can't read it. What if no one else can read it? Still, the book tugs me back to something. In my search for Dow, I had also found Dan Gunther, a writer living in Colorado, Dow's other old roommate.
Dow would get high in the action, and when he would get high in the action, he would write, and that intensity would go on for days, and then he'd crash. We've seen the pattern in a lot of creative people. He had those faculties of imagination and personal energy that took him to other places. For that reason, I think I probably connected with him in a lot of ways. And of course, we had the common ground of our interest in writing, and that was important.
I mean, you saw him write this thing out.
Oh,
I mean, how somebody that intense, how does he just stop? And why didn't he write anything else?
Well, he may have burned himself out. It's hard to say. Looking back at, I would see him write 20 hours straight. And that intensity, you just can't keep it up. It's, you know, the muse was with him, the inspiration was with him.
There's 3 or 4 or 5 letters from you in the book that if you don't know, you just think the author's writing those letters, but they're actual letters that you wrote to him from Vietnam at the time.
Yeah, and at the time, the letters, I think, reflect the intensity and the emotion that I was feeling. The terrain we fought in was very much like this. As you look out here, much of the Arizona terrain is very much like this. The outcroppings, it's very, very similar, and it's very, very haunting. And then at other times, we were out on broad rice plains.
As Dan remembers Vietnam a long time later, it occurs to me that when he was there fighting,
Then there were large
and
expanses
I was
of
at home
elephant grass,
watching,
and that elephant grass
closing
became
in on the
6
draft
to
age,
12 feet tall.
I was not much older than my son is now.
There were box mines, there were booby traps, as well as ambushes. That kind of thing that always moving and always ever-changing terrain.
Did you ever think you were gonna die?
Oh yeah, many times. You know, it doesn't really affect you until, you know, you get back to the rear area, and then you sit back and you reflect on it.
Mhm.
That's when the real combat fatigue starts to hit you. And of course that, you know, affects different people in different ways. Some people just get sort of numb. Some people, purge their demons other ways.
Do you think The Stones of Summer is readable today? You think it's too difficult for a lot of people?
No. It's a message about someone finding himself, and it's about rebellion, and those themes are eternal. There's almost the voice of the shaman in Dow's work, but there's also the voice of the poet.
Hi, how are you?
I'm Mark Moskowitz. You sleeping?
Yeah, I dozed out.
I only get a glimpse at Dow before he shoots up the stairs and disappears. Not a sound. Nothing. I don't know what to do. Maybe the crew can come in and set up. Then he comes rushing down the stairs again and hands me a shrink-wrap copy of the book.
I had 3 of those left. It's been out of print for 20 years.
Yeah, I bet we can get it back in print.
Maybe now is the time to dig up Dow's old agent, Carl Brandt. What do you think of all these lists lately of the 100 best of the century and this and that? Has there been a...
Anything that'll get people interested in reading, fine. I'm for that.
I thought of making my own list. It's sort of an amateur list, and it's sort of a wacky list. But I thought of bringing here today what I think are the 10 best first novels of the century. In 1900, Sister Carrie. Okay.
All right.
Now, some of these are recognized many years later, and some of them are here for some oddball reasons. Tropic of Cancer. Okay. What do you think so far?
So far, so good.
Top 10, right? Mm-hmm. 10 of the...
10 that made a difference.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is when you look at these, I'm going to stack them up so I can do them, is one of the things that got me interested in making this film is, as you go through these, many of these are one and done. The guy wrote one book and one for a lifetime. Others, he never topped it. Tropic of Cancer, I don't know if Miller ever topped it. Sister Carrie, well, it's debatable. It took him 10 or 12 years, only sold 456 books. I mean, he was down and out for years. Call It Sleep, quits and becomes a poultry farmer for 20 or 30 years, right? Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison, one and done again. As an agent, you see a lot of first novelists and first novels, and is this typical? I mean, is this, some of the great ones are just, that's it.
There are no generalities that make any sense about this business, either about this or about anything else. Some writers only have one book in them. Some writers sort of mine their youth and their adolescence, and that's really all they have to write. And they've somehow rigged their lives so that they don't learn anything more in the kind of serious emotional sense.
Can you think of a writer you represent like that?
No.
That's the 10th book on my list.
Oh my. Oh yes. He was a good man. And that's a great book. Really great book. He's still alive?
He's still alive.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Good God. Where's he living?
Iowa.
Iowa.
He's living in the house he grew up with where the novel takes place.
Oh.
We're taking our first family vacation in a couple years, and I didn't want to leave all the film around. You know, this is 2 years of stuff now. It's only been a couple hours for you and watching this, but it's been more than 2 years of us making it. We got some other boxes today too. This is a box of, it's a box of stones. Right? Okay, this is the box just got back from the lab. This is Bob Gottlieb's interview that I haven't even seen yet. You've probably seen it, it's already in the film, but I haven't. It's kind of weird the way that works. Sort of like a time tomb. There's a guy named Dan Simmons who wrote this great science fiction tetralogy called Hyperion, which people go in and out of these time tombs, and that's like a lot of what these things are, time tombs. So what I did is I read this, I don't know, yeah, summer of '98, okay? And it fell apart on airplanes. I was traveling when I read it. But I'd had this copy of the paperback for 25 years or so since it came out. And I just could never get to it. And I finally got to it, and I just thought it was a great book. So I went to the library, I went to Amazon.com to get all your other books. Well, when they weren't there, I said, well, I'll go to the used thing and get all they must be out of print. I'll go get the out of print ones.
I always felt like I thought like a writer. No, I just read. Yeah, I really did quit scribbling. Yeah.
Right.
The most important book I read since college was I caught up with the entire 8 volumes of Casanova's book.
Yeah, you said
it
that
just blew me away. Because autobiography is both a lesser mask and a greater mask, you know. I thought of Murray too because he wrote it in the 70s. It goes on the list with Cervantes and some of the things that were written by people in their 70s, you know. They're starting to anthologize Twain's piece about his Confederate War days, that short piece.
Yeah.
Same thing, it's just clairvoyant. It's like you open the page and it's like you're really walking around in Missouri, you know, in 1859 with a bunch of guys, and it's just, you know, you could say that about any nice piece of writing, but I mean, it's just several steps beyond. But yeah, it changed the question why I don't write a lot of fiction, you know. It's a different mask. I admire it so much, but.
Well,
that is
a
great fiction.
Stones. I mean, there's great pieces in there.
Well, that's where the workshop came in. I was taught by poets, you know, in undergraduate. I approached it as each page was a kind of a poem. I considered the whole thing a poem from beginning to end, personally. Now you can't find meters and rhymes in it, but you know what it's.
But there's great stories on every page too. I mean, there's so many stories in the book that there's enough stories in there for 10 pieces of fiction. I mean, you know, and you convey them quickly, and then you go through them. It's not that's what I like. It's the stories that drive all these things.
Thank you. You remember better than I do, to tell you the truth, in a lot of ways.
Well,
I'm pretty bookish, really.
But the book comes.
My mom's heredity and the war and trying to write the great American novel and trying to get through graduate school and a lot of things. I had an acute anxiety for about 10 years. I was really speeded up. It took me about 19 years of working in a weld shop to sort of smooth out. It took me at least 10 years, but you know, and I took care of my mother. It's kind of a family curse.
So your mom just kept coming home with books from the library?
Yeah.
Biography after biography?
She really did.
And you saw what there was, that should get 3 at a time, or should just go 1 at a time?
Oh yeah, she was a total voracious reader.
That's something. What did you read as a kid?
I was thinking about that. I had terrible ear trouble. It almost killed me. I used to crust come in my ears, hospital, before they had penicillin and sulfa trying to cure all this. My mom hauled me around town, and my dad would bring me puzzles at home, and I remember before I got out of grade school, I'd read the Bible, because my grandmother sort of forced it at me. I read 1 chapter a night, and I'd read the complete Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes that my dad bought me when I was delirious. And you couldn't recapture that experience as long as you live again.
Did you write this longhand?
Yeah, originally. My dad gave me an old IBM typewriter, one of his secretaries turned back in, those 50s things. And I couldn't type anything looking over here, but if I was looking at here, I can type
faster than I could talk finally. I typed so much for 2 years. Typing to me is open-ended. You know, my metaphor for that, with, you know, the sorcerer's apprentice, the broomstick part, where you pick the broomstick up and you never can drop it again. That's what happened to me on that. That novel may look finished to you, but to me it's totally open-ended. It was never, they took that away from me. Absolutely took it out of my hands. That's what I'm doing now. If I started typing, I just keep redrafting. Shakespeare didn't have paper. You could just see him walking around, memorizing that stuff, and going to the playhouse every day and bouncing it off everybody. You know, I tell you, one of the great sorrows of my life, I had the idea of doing Shakespeare in 1592 and 70s. That's one thing I wanted to do. If I could sum my whole intellectual life up, and I finally figured, it took me 20 years to figure this out. First century Rome, Shakespeare, the American Civil War in the 19th century. That's pretty much what I read. That's pretty much what I'm interested in. Don't ask me why. And there's Chaucer and all the writers I've ever read, fiction writers, but you know what I mean? Yeah. So if you got me started on Shakespeare in the right mood, that's what I was thinking about last night. You know, his other watershed year is 1605. His great plays Measure for Measure. Yeah. It's got the early comedies. It's got the tavern scenes. It's got his historical realism in it. And it just takes one step towards what I call his genre tragedies that happened after 1605. He becomes a middle-aged writer, okay? He invented modern psychology, actually. Everything we think, in a way, about it. It's got to be traced to that because it can't be traced to anything else, really. He effectively ended the Middle Ages because you can't read Shakespeare and believe in the divine majesty, you know, the divine right of kings anymore. Kings are all too human. He's the first modern. I mean, he ended the Middle Ages. He really did somehow. How do we get on to Shakespeare? I don't know. You brought him up. You asked me what I was doing the last 20 years. That's one thing.
It's the kind of thing that breaks one's heart as an agent, because nothing further did happen. It was this magnificent piece of work, and then silence. And one tends to blame oneself to some degree because somehow you might have been able to, there might have been something that one could have done, but you can't write it for them.
Yeah. How does something like this just go away? I mean, what happened?
How can one answer that? There were a couple of decent reviews, but not many.
Great reviews.
The publisher was not one of the big publishers, and that might have had some effect on it.
I used to come home and read Thomas Wolfe when I was drunk. And by the time I got out of high school, I'd read all of Hemingway. I was a very straight list. I'd read all of Hemingway and Fitzgerald.
Hold it a second. There's a Hemingway discussion in here somewhere. Back when Claire and I were having dinner with John Seeley in Maine. Here it is.
Here's a Paul earlier that, like, I hadn't read Farewell to Arms and just dismissed it. Sun Also Rises, I've read twice. I love it.
Sun Also Rises. I'll tell you something, he just got into Fitzgerald last year.
Tender as the Night knocked me out.
All of a sudden, Fitzgerald books started cropping up like mushrooms in our house.
He'd been through hell by that time. I mean, Tender as the Night was in the 30s after he'd been, you know, alcoholic and his wife was committed to an insane asylum. I mean, you know, this was rough times for unlike Hemingway. Hemingway always had a sort of a blessed life. I mean, he was in accidents, laid on, plane crashes, and so on. And toward the end of his life, he got diabetes, and was very sick and killed himself. But I mean, in terms of their two careers, Fitzgerald was classically a victim of success. I mean, really eaten up by it and destroyed by it. And Hemingway was tough.
Have you ever used, you've been on the internet to do searches and find it?
This is the kind of the student one wishes one had, without the lip, but, you know, with the energy and the enthusiasm, you know. You don't get too much lip anymore. It's very interesting.
But I think further down you
kids
go.
Don't do that. They don't. They're very passive for the most part. So used to sitting there and watching.
It's in the air. We're worried about the culture shrinking, particularly in terms of literature. But one of the things that a book gives you that you can't get anyplace else is that you are the co-creator of it. When I see Pip in the graveyard in the beginning of Great Expectations, you know, with the fog and all this, I have my pictures of that. Somebody else has slightly different pictures. But I'm not passive. You see, when you're reading, you're not passive. You're actually doing something. Your mind is working. Your imagination is working.
Books were always sacred objects. Yeah, one reason I read the Bible, you were told at a very early age by your grandmother that it was the Word of God. You had to look into that. So, but yeah, all books were clearly that. One time we were drinking in Iowa City, and there were 6 guys in the car, and it really was 25 below zero, and Iowa City is 30 miles away. And just as somebody got in, just as I started to back away and drive out, and the door hit on the high curb and just snapped off, just beautiful, just right on the 2 hinges. So we put the door in the trunk and we were driving home. And when I got home and I parked it out back there and it was snow and a legitimate blizzard started up. And so the next morning my dad had asthma all his life and he quit smoking, but he used to wake the neighbors up across the alley. So I hear him coughing and getting up and going to work, and I'm laying there as a teenager under my blankets, and I hear I hear the door slam, the car start, and I hear the car turn off. My dad comes back, and I hear him walking up the stairs. He opens the door. "What'd you do with my right front door, old boy?" I said, "Well, it's in the trunk." My dad was so great. He forgave me for that even, but I don't know.
Back outside, I called Dow's old friend, the mystery writer Ed Gorman, who also lives in Cedar Rapids.
He really was tormented in those days. I can still remember he brought over about, 50, 75 pages one night and dropped them off and said, "Would you read them?" And I thought it was brilliant.
Dow Mossman lives at home and locally attends Coe College for 2 years, where he meets 2 other writers-to-be.
Oddballs out, god damn. Well, Gunther was very popular, actually, but Dow and I were less than popular. Dow was sort of the star wherever he went, writing and everything.
He goes to Iowa University, graduates, attends the writer's workshop, where for a bit he rooms with Gunther. But Gunther enlists and goes to Vietnam. With Murray's encouragement, he works feverishly on a book called The Glass Porch. He has good friends in Vietnam. He has good friends in exile in Canada. Dow himself shows up one day at a protest against the bombing of Cambodia, and before he knows it, he's up on the stage, has grabbed the mic, and is eventually hauled off with 50 others by the police. It's 1970. He's in his room, in the house he grew up in Cedar Rapids. The manuscript grows. He can't shut it down. He won't stop. After a dozen versions and close to 1,200 finished pages, he breaks down and is hospitalized.
Oh, I sent her you'll like this. This is the picture I wanted to use on the cover of my book. I never got a chance to, so now I got a chance. You ready for this one? I thought I wanted to use that.
All right, come on. All right, we got to find the contract.
All right.
But the scene in the book, in the 3rd act, where Dawes confronts his parents, okay?
Yeah, you like that. If I had to write it now in middle age, I would have certainly given him one great scene. No.
You don't remember where we put it? All right, let's go upstairs. All right,
Yeah, well, as I was saying, welcome to the House of Usher.
Well, maybe we'll find maybe the galleys are with the contract.
Wait a minute, yeah, here we go for that.
Oh, jeez.
No, wait a minute.
I won't go through this stuff later. What are these, other versions?
Could be, I don't know. I don't know, this isn't very easy.
I mean, look how many versions of this you got here. Is this the same?
I don't know, I guess we're verging on obsession here. I don't remember this stuff. What does that say?
It says Dow's second draft.
Second draft.
Whose room was this? Was this your room?
Yeah, I've been here for about 40 years, though. As a coincidence, when that was published, Howard W. Sands, which is a massive printing plant, was 2 miles down the road from where I was living in Indianapolis, so I went down there
Did you ever sell any of those on your own?
The woman at the factory gate wouldn't quite let me in, but then she noticed I was with my buddy Bob Nelicki, who was playing for the Indiana Pacers at the time. So about 30 seconds later, the head of the whole plant comes down, gray-haired. 2 minutes after that, I found myself getting 20 free shrink brown freebies, which half of them I sold in his tavern.
What, when you were working for him in the
I went to Key West for a while.
You were working
That
in
was
the bar?
probably the best money I realized on the book, actual cash.
Who bought it? I mean, who's coming into a bar buying that book? I mean, what did you just?
Well, I doubt anybody that was in that bar that bought that book read it. I'll say that. But
What's this stuff?
I don't know, but if you find a bag of money, I want to have.
Is there anything in the basement?
I know the contract would be. I know that was an envelope I saw it 2 months ago. And I told my sister, there's something I'll never need. And then you showed up.
The deal with the contract is if you have a reversion clause and a reprint clause in order to own the book again, get it back.
Oh,
from
you know,
Bob
that was the
or
height of my
Bill.
life. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that was, you know. My good
Because I think that's the way you get rates.
I hope they're still dry.
Well, I don't care about the books, it's about the contract.
This was the most important thing I read since Iowa City. There it is. Whatever. Casanova's complete book with all its multiple ironies. It's too bad it cuts off when he's 52 because it really would have got good. He was starting to get depressed and realistic. I was lucky to come in at the end of publishing. Oh, I understand all that.
Forget this, right?
Yeah, I apologize.
All right, so you'll call
Unless
your
you want-
sister? Huh, what?
Unless you want one of my old welding helmets. Here,
Where's that?
you can-
An old welding helmet? Where is it?
Yeah, you want it for a souvenir?
Yeah. Let's see the old welding.
They look nice on the wall. I had about 4 of them. No, I'm serious. I had one hanging in my bedroom. You know, that's such a great medieval image. You just hang that baby and you just notice it. You know.
Do you know what he did?
No, I have no idea.
He went back to welding. He welded for 19 years. When I found him in the house, he had just finished taking care of his elderly mother for 4 years. She had just died 30 days before, and he was working nights, 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. for the Cedar Rapids Gazette bundling newspapers.
Yes. We do that to our people in this culture.
Let me ask you this. Some of these books came back. We talked about Moby Dick. Melville comes back. Call It Sleep comes back. Tropic of Cancer waits 25 years to finally get read and people seen and breaks through. I've talked to dozens of people, traveled thousands of miles over the last 2 years. I've talked to writers, editors. I can barely find anybody who's read the book or knows about it, okay? And through all that time, I realized I asked them all the wrong questions.
What was the right question?
The right question is only one question. Will you help us put this book back into print?
Sure, but you were the person who's got to make this happen.
I was thinking about you're way past an ideal reader. I don't know what you are. You're something else. You're in another dimension. But anyway, after 25 years, for you to show up on my door and talk about this book is pretty amazing. I started thinking. I thought, if a tree falls in the forest, I think there's a noise. Okay, if there's nobody listening. On the other hand, if you make something of craft or of fiction, or a piece of art, or try to do that, and there's nobody listening, then there isn't any noise. So that's also true. But I'm saying you're more important in this than I am. I mean, if this book is somewhat alive in you, I mean, that's all I could ever ask for. And the process is in you now. I mean, there you go. I mean, obviously, but profoundly too. So.
Shortly after I returned from Iowa, Dow loses his job bundling papers at night. He writes me letters, and we keep in touch. Dow sends me what he thinks is the great lost book of the 50s, and I return the favor and send him my choice from the 40s. Both were bestsellers. Both are long gone. The year brings other changes. Diabetes knocks down my father for the last time. I have no interest in finishing the film, but then if I don't, no one will ever know about Dow.
What's important is that we keep writing novels. My real fear these days is not who's going to be the best writer of us all, But whether novel writing as such is going to continue with any health, I'm not sure it's going to. So I think in 50 years I can say, you know, I think I'm going to read another novel this year.
Norman Mailer, recorded in 1991.
In a way, I pulled it off past my wildest dreams. In a way, it was a total failure. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It really was. But to have somebody backtrack, I don't know, I was a little stunned that it died that quick, to tell you the truth.
Well, I think that's what
Probably
we're going
took
to
me
talk
20
about.
years to say that, actually. And I wasn't let down about it. It's just the reality of it, you know what I mean? I got totally de-romanticized about writing as a career. That was part of it. That's only part of it. And then I was reading and scribbling, and it was ultimately my fault.
So you made $2 grand from that book, was it?
I made $7,000 in 15 years. Nothing happened.
Well, writers keep on writing because they keep on loving words that are at their command and keep on loving an audience which they hope will hear the words, and especially because they keep on loving the self that imagined them to begin with. And they cease writing when they fall out of love. An act of writing a book is an act of falling in love with yourself and the audience.
Well, my dad died in '96 in January. The day he died, I wrote this. This is the only thing that started me writing again. This is called Red-Haired Hags. It's my divorce poems. This is called Real Amagos. It's my short poetry. This is what I call etudes. This is all my stuff I write riding my motorcycle, basically.
You write it in your head as you're riding.
You realize that's probably how Shakespeare worked. That's what I hated about that movie. The last thing Shakespeare ever did was crumple up paper and throw it away like Carl Reiner. You know, I mean, it just never happened.
Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire.
It's like food, you know, there are some pleasures that simply never run out, and books are one of them. In every way, from simply diverting yourself from life, you enter worlds that you couldn't possibly enter in any other way. You feel the pressure of another human soul on the other side of the book, and that makes you feel less alone and less trapped in your body and less isolated. You feel that you are the brother of the author, and the two of you are working together. It's a very profound, moving experience. It's almost spiritual. when I read Dickens, the old man, right, he might just as well be sitting right next to me. That's how close he is. I feel him right there. He's there. He's with me.
Yeah, the first page of my novel, that's the first image, a blood red sun. 25 years is a weird thing. It's like 2 weeks ago and it's like forever. Memory throws it all in one bag.